what more than a few people are saying is that we have an opportunity here to demonstrate out loud in the final 2 years of the Reagan presidency keen interest in arms control by joining the Soviets in a moratorium. It would not jeopardize the United States.
What you are trying to do, Phil, is exactly the opposite of what you said a minute ago. What you are trying to do is to give up our technological lead. You are absolutely right. We are technologically ahead. We might as well go for the things we do best. Yeah. We do technology best, and if you stop testing, you're giving up your technological lead.
What does a technological lead mean here? If we can destroy the Soviet Union 10 or 20 times over, does a technological lead mean that we can reach the point where we can destroy them 50 or 100 times over, and they can only destroy us 20 or 30 times over? Then we're ahead? What kind of thinking is this? Einstein, in 1945, after the Hiroshima bomb, said that the advent of nuclear weapons has changed everything except our way of thinking. And thus, he said, we drift to unparalleled catastrophe. Yeah. The changing of our way of thinking is the central point here. If we consider nuclear weapons as just same old kinds of weapons, and the more we have, the better off we are, then we are in deep trouble.
You've got another problem.
We have too many weapons.
You have another problem.
I agree with that.
We can't afford not to have nuclear weapons. I heard the defense secretary say that himself. In so many words.
The defense secretary can't afford not to have nuclear weapons. The rest
nuclear deterrence is cheaper. So we have ourselves now in a situation with the nuclear genie out of the bottle where we can't afford to put it back because the American taxpayer would not be able to sustain the pain it would take to develop equivalents of conventional weaponry. We don't have the tanks, we don't have the armored vehicles, we don't have the ground.
Wait. This used to be called more bang for the buck. It was the argument that we could take U.S. troops out of Western Europe after the end of the Second World War, when the U.S. Was tired, for good reasons, of the war, and the Soviets had 300 standing divisions. There had to be something, we thought, to prevent a Soviet invasion of Western Europe. Nuclear weapons were considered the answer. Politically, economically, as you say, desirable. And it is a kind of genie. It is a kind of devil's bargain, because now, by slow steps, accepted by administrations of both stripes and by both the Soviets and the Americans, we have reached the point where we have imperiled our nation and our species and our planet. And it is essential to step back. Now, how do you step back without relying on nuclear weapons? There are many ways to do it. One is the idea of a minimum deterrence. A nuclear arsenal which is invulnerable to attack from the other side, but which is sufficiently small.
How many? How many?
Well, people have a range of estimates on this. The president in Reykjavik thought 0 was a good idea.
And everybody in Europe went crazy.
As did Mr. Gorbachev. But people who have actually thought of this issue...
In other words, small clusters of nuclear Minutemen...
Something like 1,000 nuclear warheads on both sides. I consider that too large a number. But something like 1,000 is thought by a number of arms control advocates to be plenty for deterrence. And if the worst happens and nuclear war does break out, then the worst doesn't happen in terms of the consequences.
Wouldn't that be wonderful, though?
That's what we're trying to do in Geneva.
You're just talking about it. You guys...
Listen, it is so easy, Carl, to knock everything. You know,
it's very easy to knock this administration. I agree.
This administration...
Let me say,
this administration has done nothing.
No, come on.
It's embarrassing.
Come on. We have done a lot. Let me just tell you. May I? He is not knocking the administration. He is knocking his made-up arguments about the administration.
Well, tell us what the administration has done.
Let me tell you exactly what the administration has done.
Which arms control agreements have you negotiated?
Exactly. Let me tell you. When this president came in, he said arms control in the past has not been successful. Why not? Because it had allowed a build-up and build-up and build-up of nuclear weapons. We are going to get the Soviets in a position where we start negotiating on... Are you going to listen, or are you going to do your research right here?
Go ahead.
You want to do your research right here.
I'm just pulling out the facts, Ken. I can hear what you're saying also.
If you were going to do your research right here, you know, we'll wait.
Go ahead.
I've already done the research.
That's your point.
Waiting for an opportunity to tell you what it is.
All right. My point is...
To those who say this administration has been...
I'm trying to tell you. To those who say that this administration has done nothing, we are now discussing with the Soviets in Geneva deep reductions on nuclear weapons, the kind that Carl Sagan and others thought was inconceivable 4 and 5 and 6 years ago.
Right.
We have succeeded where other administrations have failed in getting the Soviets to acknowledge that there has to be deep reductions on nuclear
Fine.
weapons.
Now, let me just understand this administration's, what is Campbellman's marching order here?
Campbellman's marching order is to try to eliminate
50% reduction in ballistic missiles. Those that go out of space.
That's right.
We're going to leave the
Big ones.
air-breathing medium size for just a second. 50% reduction in ballistic missiles on both sides.
That's right.
This administration
That's a wallop. That's
it's a lot.
tremendous.
I mean, wouldn't that be
Tremendous.
something
It'd
if
be
you got
terrific.
that?
Be terrific. Eliminate entirely Euro missiles, the INF or intermediate range missiles. Eliminate them from any place
Do you
on
expect
Earth.
the Soviets to make any kind of compromise on the issue of SDI testing?
I do.
So you would argue then at this moment, this administration appears to be ready to strike in a dramatic headline way in Geneva that will make even Carl Sagan happy.
Nothing will make Carl Sagan happy. Nothing will make Carl Sagan happy.
I don't.
Okay,
Well,
he likes to complain about this administration.
I don't in the
think
least like to complain.
That's clear.
I
He
would
makes
be
up
very
arguments.
happy to
Okay.
be proud of this administration. It would make me
Say
feel
a nice
wonderful.
thing about it then.
You got to do a nice thing first.
Okay.
And I mean, it's very interesting, the byplay between Phil and Ken. Phil says, tell us what you've done, and Ken says, here's what we're talking about. You haven't done anything. You only talk. And the act
That's not true.
Please give me a chance
Sure.
to do some business here.
All right.
And also, this audience wants in this. It's their kids we're talking about. We'll be back in just a moment.
IGA Today.
Hi, I'm glad you waited. Go ahead.
Yes, I am totally against nuclear testing.
Yeah.
The weapons we have now, conventional weapons, are so that you can maim and injure people. Look at the Middle East, for life. Mental scars on your children and everything else.
Yeah.
We do not need these.
So let's get rid of all of them.
Yeah, let's get rid of all of them.
All right.
Slowly phase them out.
But then some guy with a message from God is going to bring one in a shoebox.
Okay, what happens to these Middle Eastern countries that are testing nuclear weapons? We can't be assured that they're not going to trigger something off. So if
Yeah.
somebody doesn't get their hands on a little plutonium,
Yeah.
turns around, makes himself an A-bomb, and holds the whole country hostage?
I'm glad you called. Hi, go ahead.
Hi. I'm calling because I totally support the nuclear arms testing, and although we don't want the war, what are our alternatives? We need something more than just strong words to back up what we say.
Yeah, what is it that you fear most? What will happen? What will happen if we don't have a nuclear deterrence?
Well, what I want, I think we need some more trust in the people that we have elected. We've elected these people. We have to put our trust
Right,
in
we
them.
have to trust them.
Some testing.
Yeah. And if they didn't know what they were doing, they wouldn't be in Washington. I'm glad you waited. Go ahead.
Hi. I want to know how far ahead are we, this power stick, how far ahead are we compared with the Russians in nuclear testing?
How far ahead are we?
Yes.
200 tests.
200. Oh, you mean in terms of the scorecard for testing? You're saying we have 200 tests more than they do?
If that's the question.
Yeah. Let's see what wisdom we have out here. Yes, ma'am.
I'm really concerned about low-level radiation, having been on a panel in eastern Connecticut around a power plant, and we find that it takes 20 years for things to show up. And I'm worried about the people that live around these areas, having a son and daughter in New Mexico.
Yeah, the fact is that we do all of our nuclear testing underground. We make sure that there's no radiation that leaks out. And on that score, we've been very successful all these years.
As Dr. Edelman had said, I'd like to ask Professor Sagan if the Strategic Defense Initiative wasn't nuclear-driven, would he be opposed to it?
Yes.
Because?
Because SDI will not deter a Soviet attack, because The Soviets have at the present time 10,000 nuclear warheads, and even a system which is 90% effective will let through enough Soviet warheads to utterly destroy the United States. Beyond that, the Soviets can overwhelm it, they can underfly it, they can outfox it. It's also ruinously expensive, $1 to $2 trillion. $2 trillion is the entire national debt. Plus, there's a very good likelihood that Star Wars increases, not decreases, the chance of nuclear war. Except for that, it's a great idea.
Can you imagine what we would do if the Soviets proposed for themselves an SDI?
Which would effectively disarm the United States.
We would be hysterical.
That's exactly what the Soviets have been doing for a good number of years. They've been researching strategic defense and trying...
I've heard that. For
Phil,
17 years, it is the claim of the defense
But
secretary.
Phil, they have a deployed strategic defense system today around Moscow. Let me just say...
Permitted by treaty.
Right.
The United States has also that option, and we chose not to do it because those defenses are so ineffective.
Let me make one comment. Carl Sagan talks about how strategic defense is just a bad idea. Let me say that years ago, we had the saying that some things are so silly that only an intellectual could have thought of them. I think to leave this country vulnerable to a nuclear attack, not to research at all strategic defense, to say the greater our vulnerability, the greater our safety, is one of those things that's so silly only an intellectual could have thought of it.
But what's so silly about this? An agreement banning outer space for this kind of technology will do more to enhance the reputation of the United States of America in the world community than all the wizardry and the technology put together. It gives us an opportunity to say we join the other superpower in making outer space inviolate.
We
pure.
did that, Phil, we did that 15 years ago. We have an outer space treaty banning weapons of mass destruction in outer space.
And you're convinced you can test SDI technology without violating that treaty?
Right you are.
Well, not the bomb-driven X-ray laser. That would be a clear violation of the treaty.
Yes.
I have to say something. You made me laugh. You really did. Saying you have to test the nuclear weapons to make sure that they're safe. I mean, okay, we test them, and then something happens, something goes wrong. Oh, gee, sorry about those 100 million people that died. I mean, you just can't test something like this. I think Reagan and Gorbachev got to get their act together and say, listen, we have to lower this. So they're playing with toys back and forth. I have more toys than you, so we have to make more.
Yeah.
What's to say if you do? Dr. Edelman, if you do say that testing is now fine, no one's getting hurt, fine. What's to say if we test this one, and why not go a little further? Next time, test the next one. And then if that's safe, why not test the next one a little further? When do you stop? When do you want to stop testing?
Well, that's a very good question, Phil. Let me answer that. We want to stop testing when we get down so that we do not need nuclear weapons anymore. Simple as that.
Well, what has to happen?
That should be our priority.
Why not now enter
And that should be our priority.
Why not now enter it?
Okay, because, as I explained before, you do not want to do anything that increases the risk of war. We have gone, and Europe has gone through 2 world wars the first half of this century. That is a terrible, terrible...
Do you see it in the future? Do you see it a year from now, 2 years from now? No way to tell? What will tell? Testing more will tell?
I'll tell you what will tell. When the Soviets get serious as we are in Geneva, about reducing as serious as we are.
You gotta be kidding me.
Yes, we are.
What is Reagan doing to stop these testing?
I'm telling you,
what is he
has
doing?
to be kidding.
He's not getting anywhere with Gorbachev. He's not getting anywhere trying to stop this.
Were you here during the first half of the show, or weren't you?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then you heard, and I don't have to repeat, that what we're talking about in Geneva and negotiating about actively in Geneva is something that has defied every previous administration. What we're talking about in Geneva and actively negotiating about in Geneva is reductions of nuclear weapons. The kind of reductions that previous presidents never attempted because it was thought by the experts, Carl Sagan and people like that the Soviets would never entertain ideas like that.
It's a total misrepresentation of my point of view. I argued in the very nuclear winter paper in Foreign Affairs that you referred to before that both superpowers should get down to a very small number of nuclear weapons by the year 2000. This was a 1982 article, long before the president had done anything in the way of words. Just wanted to say...
That was after our positions in Geneva.
Take a look at what the Soviets did with this unilateral moratorium. If you want to compare what if you want to be objective, compare what the 2 nations did. The Soviets unilaterally stopped testing. They said, We think that stopping testing is a way to stop the arms race. We invite the United States to join us in this moratorium. In 1963, when President Kennedy made a moratorium on above-ground nuclear testing and invited the Soviets to respond, the Soviets responded with their own moratorium within 1 week. Here it is a year and a half after the Soviet moratorium. The United States has not done anything to stop testing. Compare what the two nations have done. Doesn't say that the Soviets are perfect or that they're great guys. On this issue, look at the actions, not the words.
Let me just correct myself. Carl Sagan goes on trial next week for his involvement in demonstrations at the Nevada test site, and the first nuclear test of the year will be conducted by the United States underground on February 5th. That marks the end, then, of the Soviet moratorium, and we'll be back in a moment. Hi, I'm glad you waited. Go ahead.
Yes, Phil.
Yeah.
I'm a long-distance truck driver. I've been watching you guys for 2 years, but this gentleman here from the Reagan administration, he just got me fired up like you can't believe. Wow. Now, very, very easily put. I think that he's not taking into consideration the audience. Will you just look at the people in the audience, taxpayers like me? You know, the people are pissed off. They're nowhere near as pissed off as I am now. Now, let me just take the issue here.
Yeah.
Now,
I think you mean that you're angry or you're upset.
You better believe it, because I'm a high-paying taxer.
Yeah, in other words, what is, you think this is costing your money, this nuclear spiraling thing?
You better believe it is costing me money. You just showed in the very beginning of the program the explosion on the ground. I can see the ground shaking from television here, and you can see the vapors. Now, how do I know 25 years from now the vapors didn't drift over someplace in Arizona and hurt somebody's kids 25 years from now? How do I know? Well, tell me something. Very simply put. Why is it that the money that they're spending on arms stuff, why can't they, instead of building up the arms, why can't they build up the people in the United States? Why can't we build up the people? Why are we building up arms? They just said we got enough arms to blow up the whole world.
Okay, right? hang on a moment.
The fact is, Phil, that what we want in this country is we want peace and we want freedom. And the fact is that military might, regardless of what people would like in an ideal world, military might has basically kept us out of war these years. And that is very important. I think history shows, if I can...
I'm just indicating I want to say something afterwards.
What is it?
Not interrupting.
I think history shows that strength does deter aggression and that weakness is provocative. And if you're saying, well, that's sad that that's the way the world works, it is sad because you have aggressor nations around the world and you have totalitarian nations.
But you seem to believe that fewer nukes mean weakness.
No, I didn't, Phil. Were you here the first part of this half hour?
All right, you're saying you're going for a 50% cut.
We are working on it every day in Geneva with the negotiations.
Can I just pick up one point? How much money has the United States spent on the Cold War? It's an interesting question. When the Reagan administration leaves office in January '89 or earlier, the amount that will have been spent will have been $3.7 trillion. How much is $3.7 trillion? $3.7 trillion is enough to buy everything in the United States except the land. Every house, ship, truck, car, skyscraper, amusement park, baby's diaper, everything that isn't the land in the United States could be purchased for what we spent on the Cold War. And the net result is that we are much less secure now than we were when the United States was invulnerable in 1945.
How can you make us believe that the Reagan administration is going to reduce the arms when you are spending more on nuclear spending than ever? Actions speak louder than words.
Right. Let me address that point because it's an important one. The fact is, does anybody in this audience realize how much we're spending on nuclear weapons? We are spending of our defense budget, about 15% of the defense budget goes for nuclear weapons. When you generally ask people, they say, oh, it's half the defense budget, 3/4 of the defense budget. 85% is for non-nuclear. That's number one. Number two, Carl Sagan says, well, you have these enormous expenditures. Defense is expensive. It's expensive. We are spending less percentage of our gross national product today than Eisenhower did, than Kennedy did, than Johnson did, than Nixon did. You look at the post-war era, the Reagan administration is not at the high, it's about the same, or it's low. Now, you may think it's too much, and others people may think it's too much. Okay. Some people think it's too little. The fact is, what we have to do is to have just enough defense so that the Soviets realize aggression doesn't pay.
Well, in other words, we're sending a message to the Soviets.
Don't attack. That's your message. Keep the peace. Don't attack. That's a good
This is
message.
the most expensive message
That's a good
in
message.
the history of communications.
And Phil, it's the most important message.
In other words, we've heard this before, too, Dr. Edelman, others from the administration. Not a whole bunch of people come in here from this administration, so we're grateful that you came. You're a brave man, I guess. How will we know they got the message?
Because they don't attack. And we keep this country at peace, and we keep our freedom alive, and we keep our friends and our allies around the world at peace. That's the standard, and that's a very good standard.
This idea that a European war has been prevented by the accession of nuclear arms is a kind of undemonstrated contention. If you look at the history of conflicts in Europe, you find that from something like 1814 to 1870, there were no big wars in Europe. That was before there were any nuclear weapons. You can't just take, there's a period of time, 40 years, there haven't been any wars, therefore nuclear weapons are the reason. It's undemonstrated. And for this to be the pinnacle
Would
of
you
the
want it
administration...
demonstrated, Carl? Would you want a war so that you could disprove your theories?
This is very bad thinking.
I wouldn't.
That the burden of proof is on, let's have a war and check it out. If this is the pinnacle of the administration's argument that we haven't had a war in Europe because of nuclear weapons, we have to have a much more compelling argument. You've used it 3 times, that's why I picked it up, than just that we haven't had a war.
And we'll be back in just a moment. Oh. Yes, ma'am. Sir.
I wanted to elaborate on Professor Sagan's point.
Don't elaborate
No,
too
I'm
much.
not elaborating too much. First of all, the basic assumption that the Russians are an aggressor nation. Secondly, the history of European wars. Before the First World War, Europe was armed to the teeth and there was a war. Before the Second World War, European powers had disarmed and there was a war. There's no proof of history that strength does deter aggression. And secondly, we've had proxy wars since the end of the Second World War. We've had the war in Korea, in Vietnam, and now in Afghanistan, which are really proxy wars between Russia and the United States. So I'd like you to address some of those points. And Professor Sagan.
Yes, I know you would, but with so little time, we have the smartest audience we've ever had in the history of our program here today.
The atomic bomb ended World War II pretty well. Why did we progress this far? And I assume we will perfect Star Wars. What is going to be next? 10 years from now? 20 years from now?
Well, that's it. There's no end. That is, the United States...
You're what?
The United States...
I am for strategic war.
You're for strategic war? I'm sorry to hear it.
For strategic defense, excuse me.
Yeah, and what will you be for next?
That's just it. I want it to end. It's got to end
but it
somewhere.
doesn't end.
How
You see,
far do we go?
That's just the point.
So
that
Dr.
it doesn't...
what is next?
That it doesn't end. The United States and the Soviet Union have sufficient technological bases that there will be an infinite sequence of new weapons, new countermeasures, and it will never end unless we really end it.
Gentlemen, if you please. Hang on just 1 second. Yes.
This moratorium is really a hidden agenda on the part of the Soviet Union in that it's all related to the Star Wars issue. And I wish you guys had did a more thorough job of linking that issue.
Yeah.
Isn't the strategic defense important, though, in terms of being able to stop the nuclear attacks, to have some type of a defense?
Oh, sure, it's important.
And what about the Middle Eastern countries?
Yeah.
That, you know, when they start developing them and we don't have any defense against it, we can't deal rationally with them like you could with possibly Russia, who's more culturally...
The way small countries will use their nuclear weapons when they develop them is not with ballistic missiles, which Star Wars is intended to prevent, but by carrying suitcases and motorboats and so on, which Star Wars is utterly unable to even approach.
Over here.
Sure, everyone would be happy and more peaceful if nuclear weapons were never invented, but since they are a reality, we have to deal with it and keep up with the
We have to keep up. How long do you want to
Well,
keep
it has
up?
to be under control somewhere, but we have to have
When do you
some-
think we'll be able to stop?
Well, it should be cut down. We have enough now. We should...
You think so? Yes.
I would like to know what Mr. Sagan would do if he was running the administration, how he would change things.
In the extremely unlikely circumstance that I would be in that position, what I would like to do is to have a comprehensive test ban treaty, to make massive reductions in both strategic and tactical nuclear weapons, make a new beginning in using some of the money being spent both on conventional and on nuclear forces for elimination of poverty and hunger and removing educational deficiencies and making the planet self-sufficient. We are able to care for everybody on the planet if only we would reutilize our resources. Think of that $3.7 trillion and what could have been done with it.
All I wanted to say is I don't think there would be a winner in nuclear war.
You don't think what?
No one could be a winner in nuclear war.
Let me just try one here with Brother Sagan. You know, it really looks good for a Geneva breakthrough, in my opinion. This administration is looking for good press. That is to be sure. We also have information from Gary Hart, who met with Gorbachev, that a compromise on this passionately held idea of SDI from the Soviets may be at hand. Why don't you get your picture taken with Dr. Edelman and bring your considerable influence to at least a limited partnership with this administration toward that immediately achievable goal?
My sense is that this administration has made it extremely clear that they're not really for arms control. They have put the foxes in charge of the hen house.
It may be different now.
May I speak as one of the
different.
foxes?
That's the point.
May I speak as one of the foxes?
Yes, yes.
I think it is so easy to complain about what the administration is doing. It's so easy to blame America for everything and say what the Soviets are doing is showing us the way. I think the point is exactly the point that you got to. We need to reduce nuclear weapons. How? By reducing nuclear weapons. We need support to do that.
Judge. My 65 years that I trust the Russians to keep the peace more than my own government.
I would like to direct my question to Mr. Carl Sagan.
Yeah.
He said to receive a nice thing, you have to give a nice thing. And before you say that, if the American didn't test their weapons, the Soviet one wouldn't. So do you think that we shouldn't test our weapons?
You'd like to see a moratorium, I think.
What I would like to see, and it's not too late, and this is why we've been arrested in Nevada, is for the United States to declare
Services
its
provided
own
and promotional
moratorium.
fees
The Soviets
paid by
will
the
then
following.
maintain theirs.